Hello, my name is Wildest, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today I'm going to be covering a very topical book for the month that it is, specifically this book, titled First and Wildest, The Gila Wilderness at 100. It is edited by Elizabeth Hightower Allen. I've never heard of her before, but I'm really glad she put this book together. Now, I will start by saying that I purchased this new a few months ago at Boland's Messiah Book Center. The main thing I'm going to say about this is I picked this up because I really love the Gila National Forest and especially the Gila Wilderness Area. I sometimes for work will take people to the wilderness area to do some camping and backpacking, and I've done that the same trail several times with airmen where I organize trips for people from an Air Force base, and that's my current job. But then also I've worked with a nonprofit that offered a program called the Students in Wilderness Initiative, which was through the Wilderness Society. And the program was that students from Title I schools would have to spend 10 days in wilderness areas with, I think, 3 or 4 nights as well. It was a way to provide access to wilderness areas because wilderness areas are usually a bit more expensive to get to or a bit harder to justify getting to because a lower income family may not have the camping gear necessary for it, or they may prefer to be closer to a visitor center or established services. A wilderness area is specifically a place that does not allow motors. We'll put a pin in that. One of the reasons I picked it up, in addition to just loving the Gila Wilderness Area, is that I looked at the authors, and what this anthology includes is essays from Aldo Leopold, which includes The Wilderness and Its Place in Forest Recreational Policy. It is the essay, the publication that led to the wilderness area being designated and the wilderness area program overall. There's a foreword by Tom Udall of the Udall political family in the Southwest, and one of the former senators of New Mexico. There's a essay by Beto O'Rourke, who is from El Paso and who spent some time visiting the Gila Wilderness Area with his father, and there's an essay about that. There's Martin Heinrich, who I know not personally, but through the grapevine, kind of like a Bacon number of 2, so to speak. He used to be the director at the summer camp that I talk about that I worked at in 2018 and 2019. He used to be the director at Cottonwood Gulch Expeditions before going on to become a politician in Albuquerque, and then later a senator for the state of New Mexico. So he has some experiences with the Gila Wilderness Area. There's a couple other really fascinating essays in here. One of them, actually, that I discussed, I think, is in Fire Season. A lot of these essays are written by authors I don't know. A lot of these essays are written by authors I do know. And so this book is really fascinating because it gives an opportunity to read these perspectives. All but Aldo Leopold's are reflecting on the nature of the Gila Wilderness Area and what it means as it approaches its 100th year. The Wilderness Area designation was first given, and the Gila Wilderness Area was the first wilderness area that was given on June 3rd of 1924. Today it is June in 2024, and it is now a bit more than 100 years since the wilderness area was first designated and enforced as a wilderness area. So, one of those names that is relevant to New Mexico, relevant to the Gila Forest area, is Deb Holland. The opening section titled Bedrock has a quote from her. "Everything depends on our ability to sustainably inhabit this earth, and true sustainability will require us all to change our way of thinking on how we take from the earth and how we give back." That from an op-ed submitted to Medium in September of 2017 titled "More Than Politics, It's Personal." And that first essay that I mentioned, "The Wilderness and Its Place in Forest Recreational Policy," has a foreword here, a message from the editors, I guess, that says, Leopold's conception of wilderness would continue to evolve, but as editors David E. Brown and Neil B. Carmody write in the 1990 collection Aldo Leopold's Southwest, it led directly to the establishment of America's first wilderness area in 1924, and eventually to one of the most profound pieces of conservation legislation of the 20th century, the Wilderness Act of 1964. So, as Aldo Leopold puts it, "It is quite possible that the serious discussion of this question will seem a far cry in some unsettled regions, and rank heresy to some minds. Likewise, did timber conservation seem a far cry in some regions and rank heresy to some minds of a generation ago. The truth is that which prevails in the long run." Some definitions are probably necessary at the outset. By wilderness, I mean a continuous stretch of country preserved in its natural state, open to lawful hunting and fishing, big enough to absorb a 2 weeks pack trip, and kept devoid of roads, artificial trails, cottages, and other works of man. Several assumptions can be made at once without argument. First, such wilderness areas should occupy only a small fraction of the total national forest area, probably not to exceed 1 in each state. Second, only areas naturally difficult of ordinary industrial development should be chosen. Third, each area should be representative of some type of country of distinctive recreational value, or afford some distinctive type of outdoor life, opportunity for which might disappear on other forest lands open to industrial development. The argument for such wilderness areas is premised wholly on highest recreational use. The recreational desires and needs of the public whom the forests must serve vary greatly with the individual. Heretofore, we have been inclined to assume that our recreational development policy must be based on the desires and needs of the majority only. The only new thing about the premise in this case is the proposition that inasmuch as we have plenty of room and plenty of time, it is our duty to vary our recreational development policy, in some places, to meet the needs and desires of the minority also. The majority undoubtedly want all the automobile roads, summer hotels, graded trails, and other modern conveniences that we can give them. It is already decided, and wisely, that they shall have these things as rapidly as brains and money can provide them. But a very substantial minority, I think, want just the opposite. It should be decided, as soon as the existence of the demand can be definitely determined, to provide what this minority wants. In fact, if we can foresee the demand and make provision for it in advance, it will save much cash and hard feelings. It will be much easier to keep wilderness areas than to create them. In fact, the latter alternative may be dismissed as impossible. Right here is the whole reason for four-handedness in the proposed wilderness area policy. So, to explain some of that, at the time that the national forests were first originally created and the National Park Services, conservation of that land was seen as very strange, especially for, like, national parks, Yellowstone. Hunting is forbidden, and that's something Aldo Leopold calls out. He says, later in the essay, national parks already serve most of those purposes, but as he points out, hunting is forbidden in national parks, whereas wilderness areas should be allowed to maintain a hunting regulation. So people can go out there into wilderness areas. They can hike out there. There's no artificial trails. There's no roads. They have to do the legwork to get to that plot of land, find an animal, hunt it, and then bring it out of the wilderness area. And that is something that he believed was kind of like a manly, a masculine desire, a masculine need, was to be able to do that. And so with his policy, he's saying that it should be easier, and it actually is, of course, easier to maintain something that already exists than to let it die and then try to resurrect it later on. And we see this with places like Yellowstone, where decades of predator mismanagement led to the wolves being eradicated, and it took a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of resources to reintroduce wolves to that ecosystem. Whereas in the Gila Wilderness Area, wolves were exterminated, but black bears remained, and we also still have mountain lions. That was one of their strongholds that they never were fully exterminated from. And so that ecosystem does have some reintroduction of wolves as a big project in that area, but predators were never fully exterminated in that region. That's a pretty important facet of the wilderness areas, that when we identify something as being worth protecting, we protect it before it gets ruined. The Gila National Forest was already in existence, and a large part of it was already being used for timber, but along the Gila River and the mesas to the north of it, the wilderness area, which is where that really was established, it's almost not impossible, but it's incredibly difficult to get people out there. It's difficult to make it a sustainable business out there, and it's high elevation, but it's also low moisture, and so the trees don't really grow high enough back there for there to be good timber. Now, some cattle can graze out there, but it's also so steep and so rocky that it's almost not worth it. But it's a beautiful piece of land, and it's something that could be preserved so other people can enjoy it. It is our ability to serve the minority and to keep them and their, best interest in our thoughts and in our actions that makes a nation great. The wilderness area is a fascinating experiment, and there are aspects of it that have needed changing. So that first idea that Aldo Leopold discusses isn't quite what we got. So where it says it should only occupy a small fraction of the total national forest area, in 2024, almost 60% of national forest land is protected under wilderness areas. There are 806 wilderness areas. Now, as he stated, probably not to exceed one in each state. In 2024, we only have 50 states and a lot of territories and a lot of overseas land and so on and so forth, but we have far less than 806. So the fact that there are 806 wilderness areas means that that idea of his has been changed. Now, personally, I know that Martin Heinrich has been involved with creating a wilderness area, the Ashislapa Wilderness Area. He got that as an earmark during a defense spending bill, and though I'm not fond of the manner in which that became a wilderness area, I am glad that it did become a wilderness area. It's a beautiful geologic feature just off of Navajo Nation. It's amazing. These rocks have a harder, less erosive rock sitting on top of a more erosive rock layer, which creates these like almost mushroom looking things. It's fascinating. If you ever get the chance to go out to a Ashislapa Wilderness Area, check that out. And so all of these stories are fascinating, and I cannot express my passion for it enough. The wilderness area system, the entire idea came from one man, Aldo Leopold, who was bold enough to publish his idea and was able to convince people that it was worth it, And once it was worth it, that snowball started rolling until it was bigger and bigger and bigger. I think New Mexico has 5 or 6 wilderness areas that I can think of. The White Mountain Wilderness Area, which part of it is on fire right now. The Aldo Leopold Wilderness Area. There's the Ashislapa Wilderness Area. There's a wilderness area up near Wheeler Peak. So that's at least 5 that I can think of. And realistically, there's probably more in this state that I can't name off the top of my head. And it is fascinating how all of this came from the brain of one preservationist. And this is the big difference between conservation and preservation, is that preservation is more active, it is more preventative of development. Whereas conservation sees something being affected, Yosemite National Park is an example, it already saw Yosemite Valley being changed, and the major proponents for the national park saw the Hetch Hetchy Valley get dammed, and so we're really pushed for Yosemite to be protected as a national park. That is conservation. It's already getting used. We need to prevent further damage from happening to it. Whereas preservation says this doesn't have damage yet. It's not developed. We are going to preserve it, keep it set aside, and the wilderness area system is a big part of preservation. And Aldo Leopold's amazing idea has had a century of effect on people. All of the people that wrote in this book are younger than the wilderness area, and all of them have had great experiences. Beto O'Rourke's talks about going out there with his dad and experiencing that land. Martin Heinrichs talks about going out there with his son and hunting. Philip Connors talks about the forests in the area. There's Joe Sains, as told by Alistair Lee Bitsoy. It's titled Ndebena, which the subtitle of is This is Apache Land. There's Priscilla Solis Ibarra, who is the author of The Idea of Wilderness to Mexican Americans. The subtitle, The History of American Conservation is Not as White as We Think It Is. And there's so many amazing stories in here relating the people who live on this land, the Apache, the Mogollon, the Mexican Americans, the white Americans, and the relationships the land has to the governments that operate it. There's On Not Wanting to See a Wolf, written by Pam Houston. She is an author that I've talked about. I've seen her name in a couple other books, as well as just so many of these authors showcase the impact that this wilderness area idea has had on them. And if nothing else, I want anyone who is interested in reading about these nature-related books I talk about, whether it's the predators, whether it's, about bison, whether it's about the lands that are affected. I've discussed a lot of those types of books in my time ranting on this channel. And if any of those has interested you, I strongly encourage you to check out this book, First and Wildest, The Gila Wilderness at 100. It was first published in 2022 when the wilderness was 98. It is now 100 years old and counting, and every day it gets older is a testament to the incredible ideas and dreams of Aldo Leopold. And I strongly encourage anyone to read this. I loved it. I'm going to keep it on my bookshelf for as long as I can because this is a fascinating book. It was worth every penny I spent on it. So yeah, my name is Wildest, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.